The Security Council is today considering a seemingly routine matter of extending the mandate of the panel of experts of the 1718 Sanctions Committee. This mechanism is supposed to provide assistance to the work of the committee to ensure the effectiveness of the restrictions introduced by the Council. However, the technical nature of the mandate should not mislead us. In recent years, the situation on the Korean Peninsula and around it has changed fundamentally. The sanctions regime adopted in Security Council resolutions with the noble intentions of preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons in the region, at present is not only losing its relevance, it is to a great extent detached from reality. We are witnessing an unprecedented policy from a coalition of Western countries led by the USA to strangle Pyongyang, which includes harsh unilateral restrictions, aggressive propaganda, and direct personal threats against the DPRK authorities. Taken together, all of these measures call into question the very possibility of resolving problems on the peninsula in future. The situation is being brought to an even more dangerous brink by the active militarization of the peninsula with the direct involvement of Washington and other NATO members that are located tens of thousands of kilometers away from the DPRK. What is particularly worrying is that this is the increasingly brazen invocation in the Allies' military maneuvers of Washington's nuclear potential. Such a dangerous turn of events in the region affects the fundamental interests of the Russian Federation in the area of national security. Against this backdrop, it is clear that in recent years, sanctions have not been able to achieve the international community's stated aims and have not led to a normalization of the situation surrounding the peninsula. This situation is not encouraging the parties to dialogue, particularly after Washington has demonstrated to the entire world the underhanded game that it is playing. And yet, the sanctions impose a heavy burden on the North Korean population. As a result of undermined confidence between the UN and Pyongyang, there are no UN entities present on the country's territory, entities that could deal with this important issue. That state of affairs must urgently be changed. In a certain sense, the DPRK's example is unique. It is only in respect of this country that open-ended Security Council sanctions have been introduced and are being applied. There are no basic mechanisms to alter the restrictions. There is no provision for a fair verdict procedure for the delisting of particular individuals or persons. All of the remaining restrictive measures in respect of individual countries have ultimately realistic aims and are subject to review on a regular basis. In that connection, we are convinced that it is high time for the Council to engage in reflection on updating the sanctions regime in respect of the DPRK. Our country repeatedly advanced ideas to that effect and tried to adapt the restrictions to the rapidly changing realities on the ground. One such initiative is the Russian-Chinese humanitarian draft resolution that remains relevant. However, all of our attempts to advance that have time and again come up against the absolute reluctance of Western countries to deviate from their destructive and punitive logic vis-à-vis the DPRK.
I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/255 please raise their hand. Those against? Abstention. The result of the voting is as follows. 13 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States is deeply disappointed by the outcome of today's vote. Today's vote was nothing more than the attempt by one council member to silence the independent, objective investigations into DPRK Security Council violations. There is simply no other honest way to view this. It's important to ask ourselves why. Why would any council member not vote in support of this mandate renewal? Why would any council member break the otherwise 14 years of unanimous adoption? Just looking over the DPRK panel of experts' reports, the answer is quite clear. The panel began reporting in the last year on Russia's blatant violations of the UN Security Council resolutions, in addition to the DPRK's persistent sanctions evasion efforts within Russia's jurisdiction. I provide this message to all member states. Russia owns this failure. Russia is the reason you will no longer receive reports from the panel of experts. Today's vote will only embolden the DPRK to act with further impunity, as the DPRK jeopardizes global security through the development of long-range ballistic missiles and sanctions evasion efforts. This is not the behavior of a responsible member state, let alone a permanent member of the Security Council. And China, with its abstention, has once again shown us where it stands on curbing DPRK proliferation. Colleagues, today was not the outcome the United States wanted, nor the outcome the rest of the Council members worked so hard over the last 5 weeks to avoid. The resolution before us was, in the United States' view, far from ideal. But this resolution reflected our most sincere attempt at compromise and flexibility. We commend our colleagues who put aside their differences in support of the panel. But some proposals were simply unacceptable. Unprecedented attempts to silence the panel and otherwise corrupt its independence have no place in any committee. Just as egregious was the proposal to undermine all of the sanctions working to curb the DPRK's unlawful pursuit of WMD and ballistic missiles. You've heard us say it here before, but I'll say it again. The United States will not reward the DPRK for its repeated violations of Security Council resolutions and attempts to undermine the global nonproliferation regime. The DPRK sanctions need maintenance, not elimination, in order to effectively work, especially when it comes to building member states' awareness and capacity to protect against DPRK malicious cyber activity. Moscow has done more today than simply obstruct the work of the 1718 Committee. Moscow has undermined the prospect of a peaceful, diplomatic resolution of one of the world's most dangerous nuclear proliferation issues. But let me be clear. Russia, you silenced the panel of experts today, but you will never silence those of us who stand in support of the global nonproliferation regime. The Security Council resolutions and all of their measures against the DPRK's unlawful pursuit of weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles still remain. And it is the responsibility of every member state to fully abide by these Security Council obligations. The United States remains committed to continue to work with allies and willing partners to hold the DPRK and its defenders accountable for its actions. Thank you, Mr. President.